But the big thing that we talked about on our show today that is like it's making me more angry the longer I stew on it is this notion now that the Astros, after going to 4 World Series in 6 years, after going to the ALCS consistently and consecutively in all that time, that somehow that Jim Crane's a buffoon who doesn't understand what his culture is and that it's toxic and everything's headed for a disaster. I don't get it. I feel like there's still vestigial hatred for the Astros over the fact that things hated people hated the Astros for a lot of things before there was ever a sign stealing scandal, or as we like to call it, the being better than everybody else scandal. It's that the Astros bucked a lot of trends, did things differently. Jeff Luhnow specifically, classic, thought he was the smartest guy in the room. And unlike the Enron guys, he actually was the smartest guy in the room, which people hate even more. There's one thing, if you claim to be the smartest guy in the room and then you get found out that you're not the smartest guy in the room, people will remember you in a negative light. But if you claim to be the smartest guy in the room and then you prove that you are the smartest guy in the room, they will hate you for the rest of your life. And I think some of that has flowed over into the Astros right now because if you're a team that's had as much success as the Astros, for there to be all these exposés and articles dredging up, rumors and gossip about how bad your culture is when you're doing the exact thing that 29 other teams are trying to figure out, I don't get it. I really don't get it. And Jeff Passan from ESPN, who honestly I think has been more even-handed than a lot of Astros fans think throughout all of this. He reports some news that Astros fans don't like. I get that. He defends the Astros when it comes to things like buzzer conspiracies and other things that just have no substance and truth. But I think in this article, I feel like the baseball media has stumbled into something, which is that, unlike the rest of baseball, the Astros keep things interesting 24/7, 365 days a year, and we can keep getting clicks no matter what. And I'll tell you, before we get into this article, where there are various things said about the Astros, some of which I'm sure are true, but when presented as a tell-all, look like a completely different deal. They paint Jim Crane as a hard ass who drives his employees hard. Unlike all these other billionaires who are just happy-go-lucky characters. So there's one part in here that I'd skip to, which is when they explain in the beginning, Jeff Passan sets this up with a vague tease where he talks about a Hall of Fame employee with a reputation for yelling at employees. So you wonder, like, oh, okay, well, gosh, I don't think that's Biggio or Bagwell. And you remember, like, oh, yeah, Reggie Jackson plays for the Astros, or coaches for the Astros right now. So maybe they're talking about Reggie Jackson. Gosh, I wonder what this could all be about. This is what he says about Reggie Jackson. Let's see. Jackson, who joined the Astros in May 2021 as an executive assistant, despite never playing for the organization. All right. Yelled at. Okay. There's another one. Okay, despite never playing for the organization, as opposed to the vast majority of Astros employees who have played for the organization? Nonsense. Despite never having played for the organization, yelled at members of the team's front office this year and later would apologize, according to sources. And then that's it. That's it. So Reggie Jackson yelled at employees and members of the front office, and then that's it. He would later apologize. I don't know what that speaks to. I don't know in that instance if Reggie Jackson was justified to be yelling at front office employees. I'll be honest with you. Sometimes what happens with sports organizations is the front office employees become a little too comfortable. And you remember the Seinfeld episode? Kids, bear with me while I explain this. George Costanza was a character who worked for the Yankees. And at one point, he was down giving advice. I can't remember which player it was. Giving advice to a player that about how to hit the baseball. Schwabe points out, 2 World Series, 4 AL pennants, 6 ALCS appearances. And like, okay, he's overstepping his bounds. So I don't know exactly what Reggie Jackson was upset about with employees. Maybe he was in the wrong. Maybe he wasn't. I guess you shouldn't yell at people ideally around the workplace, but it happens, especially in sports, because people are in a high stakes, it's a high performance business. So that right there rubbed me the wrong way, and that you dragged Reggie Jackson's name into this, probably because, hey, he's a Yankee. And people know Reggie Jackson's name. The New York media loves a juicy tidbit about Reggie Jackson and maybe how the Astros are soiling the driven as the pure snow constitution of Reggie Jackson, because now he's yelling at employees with no explanation for it. So there's that. But then you get back to some of these other things that frankly, I think have sent some Astros fans into a tizzy. When they start talking about, and this isn't just Jeff Passan, this is multiple different people that have reported that maybe, Jim Crane really respects Jeff Bagwell's opinion. And people I know and respect have reported this. I think Michael Schwab might have reported that at some point. There's nothing in and of itself that's wrong with Jim Crane respecting Bagwell's opinion. Where people start getting nervous is that Bagwell reportedly has criticized the player development system, that Bagwell, we know from the broadcast that Bagwell's skeptical of some of the new age analytics that have, frankly, done really well for the Astros. This is where I think you're underestimating Jim Crane as a business person and as an owner if you think that Jim Crane can't pick and choose the advice he takes from his employees. That if you think that Jim Crane somehow isn't going to be able to, divine out what he likes from one of the analytics staff versus from Jeff Bagwell or Craig Biggio or any of these other guys. So I think that the notion that, hey, he's thinking about hiring Brad Ausmus as GM, or he's thinking about going with Jeff Bagwell. And I don't think he's thinking about going with Jeff Bagwell as GM. I think he's going to continue to use him as a trusted advisor. I think that you're looking at a guy who's been doing this since before the Astros got good again, remember? Like, he's been listening to old school scouts grouse about how Jeff Luhnow didn't know what he was doing. He watched Jeff Luhnow fire an entire scouting staff, and then Jim Crane oversaw a lot of the hiring back of at least some numbers of scouts and trying to find that mesh between two worlds. And it is Michael Schwab here. Thanks, Schwab. Thank you. Fact check me on any of this. I'm trying to do more interactivity with the stream. So please, everybody, use your comments, and we'll make this as fun as possible. Many of you on your lunch hour or ignoring your work. I just want to have a good time with this. So please be interactive as possible. And Schwab, tell me anything that I'm missing that you've reported, because I've got bullet points all over the place. This is a quote that got me too. Sometimes I wonder if Jim thinks he's Jerry Jones, said one Astros employee who was among the dozen people with knowledge of the organization with whom ESPN spoke to better understand the inner workings of arguably the most successful franchise in baseball. Okay, so thank you for that, Passan. Okay, sometimes I wonder if Jim thinks he's Jerry Jones. That can mean a lot of things. I think the basic insinuation that most of us would take from that is, okay, he wants to be the GM, and he might not actually know what he's talking about. That's what I think of when I think of Jerry Jones. I think most Cowboys fans would agree with me that, is it just the green screen, Michael? Son of a bitch. So if it's just Jerry Jones as like the guy that doesn't actually know what he's talking about, but wants to believe that he's, wants to act like he knows what he's talking about, that's an issue. Jim Crane knows what he's talking about. Like Jim Crane could be Jerry Jones in that Jim Crane played some college baseball. Jim Crane, had a surface understanding of baseball from the lower levels. And he could have taken that and been like Jerry Jones and thought, well, I played at Arkansas, so I'll just get out there and what can't I do that stupid little Jimmy Johnson did? He's just a foolish little man with a big old face. That's not Jim Crane. Like Jim Crane has allowed Jeff Luhnow to be the architect of what we have now. Jim Crane allowed James Click, and if anything, implored James Click to do more and to be more and be more aggressive as a GM. and he just didn't get what he was looking for. So does he think he's Jim? Does Jim Crane think that he is Jerry Jones? I feel like he thinks he's a much better version of Jerry Jones, and maybe with a better handle on his partying proclivities than Jerry Jones. Not since Larry McPhail in 1947 has a championship franchise parted ways with its top baseball executive so soon after a title. But what became clear over those conversations was Crane's willingness to meddle in baseball operations decisions, much like the Dallas Cowboys owner who serves as GM. See, there's another loaded word, meddle, because I feel like Jim Crane meddled with Justin Verlander twice, and it worked out pretty well. It worked out the first time they brought him in, and it worked out the second time, where, as Jim Crane himself had put it, ownership gets involved in deals that big. And I don't think that's foreign to professional sports in general. This is the part that gets interesting, and I think the part that makes some people nervous when it comes to, okay, are we going to disrupt the status quo with the Astros and ruin this beautiful organization that they've created? It's when he says Crane sources said, felt coming into the 2022 season that the team needed more baseball men, in quotes, involved in operations decisions, and invited Hall of Famers Jeff Bagwell and Reggie Jackson into the team's weekly senior baseball operations meetings. And this is where it's funny. This is almost like Moneyball in reverse, where, in Moneyball, it was the GMs and the analytics guys coming in, and they were the outsiders. And Jonah Hill. Jonah Hill is an amalgamation of a bunch of different people in that movie, but he kind of represents the new age. He's identified. He's the guy that's coming in and he doesn't fit in. I feel like here Jeff Bagwell and Reggie Jackson flipped it. They're all of a sudden it's like if Art Howe were the only guy walking in there to a room full of nerds in Moneyball. That's what we have here. And I think that there's still, even amongst guys like Passan who understand the thing pretty well, there's this false division that people like to create between the analytics people and the baseball people that just isn't there. There's some, don't get me wrong, and with the Astros, I think it's probably more pronounced than it is with some organizations, just if you're looking at it from the outside in. The thing that I've always been impressed with the analytics people is that they always understand, even like the cockiest amongst them, at least the ones that I've talked to. They think that there's things that old school baseball or football or basketball people do that are dumb, but they also understand and recognize, like there's an old Bill James quote. It says, just because you can't measure it doesn't mean it's not true. So there are things, there's knowledge of the game from the ground level and from having played it or coached it that those guys have that analytics just can't provide, at least not yet, would probably be their attitude. So I don't think that analytics people are upset or worried about, Jeff Bagwell somehow coming in and what's Jeff Bagwell going to do? Come in and say like, oh, actually you guys have been exaggerating the effects of spin rate. Like, no, of course not. Schwab says Jim Crane wants results. And, oh wait, you know what, Schwabby? I learned how to do this. There we go. Jim Crane wants results and someone he can trust. He trusted Luhnow as the captain of the ship. Click is a good guy, but the writing was on the wall. I agree with that. I think that Jeff Luhnow is an assassin. Like Jeff Luhnow, to the detriment of perhaps a team's reputation, to the detriment perhaps, especially in the Brandon Taubman situation, or how the being better than everybody else scandal was treated, because it could have been nipped in the bud. Like that's the real shame of the scandal, was that by September, it had lost any effectiveness that it once had, and it was actually working against Astros because other teams knew about it. Remember in the playoffs how the guys were coming out and making mound visits all the time because everybody was paranoid. Other teams were doing it. Everybody was paranoid about everything. That if Luhnow had just nipped it in the bud right then, it likely could have died on the vine right there. But whatever, when the memo was sent out. So I think some of things about Luhnow being an assassin were bad, but obviously on the sum total of things, the things about Luhnow that were an assassin were really, really good for baseball. Click is a super dude who understands math and understands pitching and does his job really well, I think. But I think that Luhnow is always going to be I think Crane's always going to be chasing that Luhnow. And let's see. Efrod says this battle between the numbers nerds and the baseball men won. That's it. See, that's where I disagree, Efrod, because I don't think that Jim Crane denies the value of the numbers. I really don't. And I think that Jim Crane wants there to be a balance. I don't, and some of the names that are tossed about as potential GMs, we've seen this now. I mean, anybody that gets whispered in a room gets mentioned as a GM potentially right now. But like David Stearns, okay, that's an old Luno guy. Sig Medal is an old Luno guy. Those are numbers guys, but that understand the baseball side of things. And I don't think there's any winning here. I think it's a matter of this too. Okay. I'm glad you brought that up, Efrod, because I think there is something. I think there's something to this. If you think back to when the purge was in effect, back like 2013, 2014, remember what was going on with the Astros at that point? They were firing all the team employees. Remember they got rid of the wives charity, and that was a big deal. And it turned out part of it was because everybody was so young that nobody had wives. So that was part of it. But it felt like the history and kind of the heart of the team were being stripped away and sold for parts. And I think that was the one extreme. And I think Crane saw that. So what do? Okay, well, Reed Ryan, who's got a connection to the past, obviously, comes back in. You reach back out to Larry Dierker and kind of try to smooth things over, and you start to get some of that culture back. So this is something that the Astros have had to try to balance, between that almost like that. There's that Silicon Valley side, where there's just no emotion, just pure numbers. And then there's that baseball side of things. And I think he's tried to do that. James Segal says, I think the opposite viewpoints and styles of Click and Crane were actually a good thing. That's a really good point, too. And that's what I wonder about. That's what I worry is, what if I'm watching El Chapo on Netflix. And I'm watching El Chapo. So Jim Crane, apologies that I'm going to make an El Chapo Jim Crane analogy here, but you're both powerful business people of different varieties. I'm watching El Chapo. I'm in season 2 or 3. Season 2 right now. Finale of season 2. And all along the way, you're watching El Chapo, who's achieved great success, except then he starts getting too aggressive. He starts letting family cloud his judgment somewhat. And the one guy who's closest to him in this version of the story, his name's Ishmael, another drug lord, salt of the earth drug lord. This guy's old school. He only kills other drug dealers and everything. Good dude, as drug traffickers go. And there's nobody like Ishmael can't pull El Chapo back. So with Crane and Click, I think even Crane understands that he needs a yin to his yang. And maybe Click just wasn't that guy. Like maybe he needs he wants somebody that's gonna go to the mattresses, that's gonna actually have knockdown dragouts. Maybe it's as simple as that. Because guys like Crane don't get to where they are without understanding that a certain amount of productive discord is good. As the old saying is, if two people agree about everything, then one of them is unnecessary. Like Crane gets that. So I think that maybe he just wants somebody that can be his foil, but in like a more aggressive or more assertive way. James Siegel said, I wish B.O.B. had someone to tell him no. You can't trade Hopkins for a Magnum condom and a can of snuff. Which people are doing the Zyn or whatever these days instead of the snuff. Okay, real quick tangent on B.O.B. and Easterby. Many of you that know me know that this is my feeling about that, but that with ownership, management, and coaching in any pro team, it's never about like the individual skills of those individuals. I think you can have a good owner, a good GM, and a good coach or manager that just don't work well with each other. And I thought I saw it early on with the Texans, where I thought Charlie Casserly and Dom Capers both had very redeeming qualities. I think they were both too nice for each other. They needed to have a more combative relationship, or at least have one be more of the alpha. I think in Bill O'Brien and Jack Easterby's case, quick tangent over to the Texans, I think that both of those guys, despite my grudging willingness to acknowledge this about Easterby. I think they both have redeeming qualities. I think Easterby in a specific role could be okay, like as a character coach, but especially those two guys together were the exact opposite of what we're talking about with Crane and whomever he picks as a GM. They were like an improv troupe where Bill O'Brien would say like, hey, what if we just traded DeAndre Hopkins? And then Easterby would say, like, yeah. What if we just take whatever we can get and bring in Brandon Cooks? And O'Brien would say, yeah. And then what if we just go ahead and it went on and on and on. It was improv troop management, and that's not what Jim Crane wants. Schwab says if Crane was just a baseball guy, then he wouldn't have approved the tanking seasons. He understood the team had to build from the bottom. Yeah, and I agree 100%. I think that's where Crane sees it. I think he sees the whole picture. I'm not too worried about it. Efrod says, I agree, Seth. I think there's a place for numbers, but Click refused to work or listen to baseball guys. He only cared about analytics. They gave him one more year to prove himself, and he refused. Yeah, and there's the whole, I'll be honest with you, this whole Contreras situation, which somebody had alerted Sean Pendergast to a little while ago. He was kind enough to share it with me. I feel like it's been reported a little bit differently by different people. All I know is that, yes, there was disagreement between how guys like Bagwell felt about Contreras and how he might fit in the locker room and how James Click might have felt about Contreras. But the weird thing is, now that there's still talk about Contreras, now that Click is gone and Click had wanted Contreras, but it got the kibosh. So there's something there, but we just don't know quite what it is. Disagreements over player evaluations furthered the chasm between the sides and further isolated Click. Reading from the Jeff Passan article for anybody who just joined us about the awful, awful culture, this culture that's destroying the Astros. How will they ever manage to accomplish anything with the culture they've had for the past several years? So Baker was among those who convinced Crane to kill the trade that would have sent right-hander Jose Urquidy to the Cubs for Contreras. That's the other side, too, that I don't think, unless I missed it in the gap between pictures or something, the whole Click and Dusty dynamic is a really interesting one. I think that whichever, and this is me just totally just talking on speculation, whenever it comes to Dusty versus Click, I think as an owner, if I put myself in Jim Crane's shoes there, whatever disagreements there were, a lack of seeing eye to eye on any of that, I feel like the players, and this is just how it works in sports, the players seem to have genuine affection for Dusty Baker. At least enough of them do that are very public about it. Framber and those guys, that's going to win out when you've got a championship squad. If that were, I think that was probably part of maybe one of the considerations, but the GM just doesn't have the same time spent around guys as Dusty Baker would. Let's see. Multiple names have surfaced for who could take over as general manager, from Sig Mejdal, who was a vital front office member of the Astros during the Luno era. If you read the book Astro Ball by that guy who wrote Astro Ball, I can't think of his name, Sig plays a major, he has a whole chapter on him in there, which is a pretty good, he's an entertaining guy. Like, he was a blackjack dealer in college. He's one of these young math nerds who is a super baseball fan and just figured out a way to maneuver his way in, kind of like a Daryl Morey style. Like, he thought, yeah, you gotta love like the practicality of some of these guys, these new age analytics guys, like Luno, who figure out a way, like an angle to get in. Morey did it. James Click did it because he started off writing for Baseball Prospectus. They just kind of look at a situation and think, okay, well, the conventional route's not going to work. So Sig Mejdal is one of those guys. David Stearns, we mentioned earlier, well-regarded former Astros assistant under Luno. He claims that he's staying with the Brewers as an advisor. I say a lot of things, too. I used to say that I was going to do a daily stream for like 2 years, and now I've done it, though. I've done it now. So David Stearns maybe used to say things, and then maybe he'll change how it's going to be. But those guys are all, like Passan says, the notion of Crane turning his back on the quantitative analysis that underpinned Luno's decision-making strikes some Astros employees as biting the hand that feeds him. That's where I just don't – that's where I don't think that's what – I don't think that's what's happening. And thank you, Michael Schwab. Ben Reiter was the guy who wrote Astro Ball. And that's a fun book. That's a good book. That's a good book to read and think about all the haters in the world. James Siegel, is there another city that has more opposing owners in its 3 major sports? Let's see. That's a really good question. I don't know, because I feel like Tillman and Crane are somewhat alike in that, they're actively running their businesses. They are relatively self-made. You know how that goes. Like, they're not heirs. Everybody's got different amounts of, boosts up. However, I don't know how exactly how Crane got started out. But I think the thing that I like when it comes to the 3 teams, I do think that there's a respect for the analytics and adapting to the game with the Texans now that there has been with the Astros and the Rockets, if only through Nick Caserio. And then I think the McNairs, because they respect Caserio, have come around on that. If Jack Easterby did one good thing, and it's easy to focus on the negatives like I tend to do with Jack Easterby, he did actually convince the McNairs to pour a whole bunch of money into player development. And that's the other side of the Bagwell reporting that has people a little bit nervous. It's that Bagwell has been critical of the player development program. And everybody else is like, okay, it seems like the player development is what really sets the Astros apart. You're able to take these Latin players that everybody else thought was washed up and over the hill at the age of 20 or 21, and they take them and they turn them into, potential Cy Young candidates. So that's the part that has people freaked out. But again, I think Crane understands that Bagwell's going to have his opinion, and he doesn't have to listen to everything Bagwell says. I don't think Crane listened to every single thing that Luhnow said, and I think it'll be all right. The biggest thing I worry about when people make the Jim Crane, when people make the Jerry Jones comparison, I worry that in baseball, it's a longer life cycle. So in football, okay, Jerry Jones takes over, fires Tom Landry. That's a very, I guess, unpopular. It seemed unpopular to me watching from afar. We didn't have the internet then, so we didn't know how people actually felt. We knew how 3 sports columnists felt, and one guy on local radio on Sunday nights that would do a sports show. Other than that, we didn't have a clue how people actually felt. I'm guessing most Dallas people thought okay, yeah, it's time for Tom Landry to go. Jimmy Johnson comes in, does what Jimmy Johnson does, both basically, as a GM, kind of driving those moves. He wasn't, but as a guy that had a heavy say in personnel, and as a coach, he creates what he did. And then Barry Switzer comes in after Jimmy Johnson's gone, wins a 3rd Super Bowl, but it's kind of riding the momentum of that. And then in football, guys get old really quickly. They retire really quickly. You draft them. They play really quickly. It's a compressed life cycle. With baseball, it's long. You draft a guy when he's 18 years old, or you take him when he's even younger internationally, and then it might be 10 years before he plays in the majors, and then he's got 6 years after that before he hits free agency. The 6-year window there for free agency is a big one too. When you go from your double and triple A prospects, your 100 rounds and the like, and extend that out to 6 years from now, you've got a big window. So that's my concern is, all right, I think Crane gets it, but just how long is this window where we can ride the Luhnow momentum? Click did a good job with the bullpen, a very, very, very good job with the bullpen, but the vast majority of people involved with building this thing were Luhnow players. The system and the brain trust. If you look at what's happened with the New England Patriots, over the years, it's not just players, it's not just Tom Brady, it's the brain trust. John Robinson in Tennessee, which one of those guys? Caserio, all these various guys, even McDaniels, who I don't think is much of a head coach, but he certainly does know how to coach an offense. McDaniels, all those guys leave over the years, and it gets harder and harder to operate. That's what I worry about. And we've gone a half hour here on the Astros. Guys, if